Welcome to the Anglian Flaneurs. Today we're in the magnificent city of Berlin. I came here often in the 1980s before the fall of the Berlin Wall, so it's a trip of nostalgia and very interested in seeing how much the city has changed in that time. Often came to East Germany and East Berlin, so it'll be interesting to see the dramatic changes that have taken place there. Just arrived at Alexanderplatz on the S9, the S-Bahn, and we're now changing over to the U-Bahn to take the U2 line to Potsdamer Platz. And in the meantime, I'm enjoying some extremely nice signage here on the U-Bahn at Alexanderplatz. We're going to drop our bags off and then we're going to make our way over to Checkpoint Charlie. And we're straight into some currywurst and some German beer. Just over the road we can see the last Soviet flag in Berlin, some DDR signage, the emblem of the DDR, and the four flags of the occupiers after the Second World War: Soviet Union, France, Great Britain and the United States. Checkpoint Charlie has become the most famous of the crossing points on the Iron Curtain between East and West, and it's where the American sector met the Soviet sector. You can see a close-up of the Soviet soldier, and that would be your entry point into the GDR and East Berlin. The Berlin Wall was constructed on the 13th of August 1961. Some 3.5 million East Germans had left their country, and this was really to stop the brain drain. There was a great exodus of talent and ability, and the East German economy was suffering. Though its meaning in the East was somewhat different, the war was not called Berlin Wall, but it was called the Anti-Fascist War. It was designed to protect East Germans from undesirable capitalist elements from the West. You can just picture the tension on that day in August 1961, with the Americans looking at the Russians, the Soviets looking back at the Americans. 2 months later, in October 1961, it did get very tense, and there was a face-off between American tanks and Soviet tanks. Thankfully, peace and common sense prevailed. And now we can see the American counterpart to our Soviet soldier. And we're looking back to what would have been the American sector in West Berlin. The decision to partition Berlin and to partition Germany was taken at the Yalta Conference in February 1945. The end of the war in Europe was in sight. The Americans and the British had made advances into the western part of Germany, and I believe that the Soviets were about 60 to 80 kilometres east of Berlin. So the writing was on the wall for the Germans. So the three leaders of the Soviet Union, the United States and the United Kingdom met. And you can see that iconic picture with Joseph Stalin on the right, Roosevelt in the middle and Winston Churchill on the left. Many decisions were made at Yalta. Two of the most important ones was the status of Poland, its government and its border lines, and that the Soviet Union would enter the war against Japan. We're just entering the outdoor museum of the Berlin Wall, so we'll spend a few minutes here and you'll see pictures of what Checkpoint Charlie looked like during the time of the Berlin Wall, no man's land, the east and west sector, and also the poor people who lost their lives trying to cross the wall. The leader of East Germany at the time, 1961, was Walter Ulbricht, who was a hardline Stalinist. Basically, he saw it as essential for the survival of East Germany, and on the 13th of August 1961, a barbed wire barrier was constructed separating East and West Berlin. 2 days later, on the 15th of August 1961, police and army engineers began to construct a more permanent concrete wall in Berlin, as well as constructing an 830-mile border between East and West Germany. I stood at this site in 1981 and 1982, where you could have your picture taken by East German border guards and you could wave back at them. Entry into the DDR and East Berlin was never easy for a Westerner. You would hand over your passport, you wouldn't see it for an hour or so, and you would sit in a very cold and uninviting room with very stern border guards looking at you as if you were something on the bottom of their shoe. You just had to keep reminding yourself that there was nothing personal in this, that this was, you were just a small part in a much wider and bigger game. It was exciting and unpleasant at the same time. And now we can see a memorial to all those who sadly died at the Berlin Wall. This is our first view of the Berlin Wall today, segments of it anyway. There's a very sombre atmosphere, and quite rightly, as people go around this museum, seeing the tragedies of all these people who lost their lives here. As I mentioned earlier, Berlin was divided into 4 sectors. You can see the Soviet sector in the east, and then working south to north you can see the American, British and French sectors, and you can see that the Checkpoint Charlie just lies within the US sector, and that the Brandenburg Gate lies close to the British sector. And we can see the famous meeting in 1963 between John Kennedy, President of the United States, Willy Brandt, Mayor of Berlin, and Konrad Adenauer, Chancellor of West Germany. We're very close to the point where Kennedy made his famous speech, where he mentioned Ich bin ein Berliner. And now we can see some footage of that famous day, November 9th in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. You just can't forget that look on the East German border guard's face as he looked totally bewildered and befuddled at what's happening. He may have spent his whole adult life defending the wall, and now all he can see is his life's work destroyed before his very eyes. I wish I'd been able to travel to Berlin straight after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It must have been an incredible time to be in and around Berlin. I'm annoyed that it's taken me 33 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall to get back here. And you can see that it made front page news in newspapers all over the world. People would say they could remember where they were when Kennedy was shot in 1963, but I think all people of a certain generation can remember what they were doing with the fall of the wall in November 89. The 2 most momentous political events of my lifetime would be first the Berlin Wall and secondly the freeing of Nelson Mandela some years later. We've moved away from Checkpoint Charlie and we're now on Leipziger Straße, heading in the direction of the Brandenburg Gate. I thought we should all enjoy this wonderful building, the WMF building, this Art Nouveau style building, just as a way of some relief for a moment. Berlin is such a powerful city from a psychogeography perspective. I'm doing this video retrospectively. We were here for 4 or 5 days and I didn't really sleep a wink. I just couldn't get really adjusted to the power and intensity of Berlin's history. It's so strong, you just feel it everywhere you walk around Berlin. London, of course, has a very powerful psychogeography presence, though its history is very different to Berlin. But with London, having been born and brought up there and having worked there for over 40 years, maybe I've just got used to London and I'm struggling really to deal with Berlin. Now we'll raise the intensity back up, and we're coming to the site of the famous East German uprising from the 16th to the 17th of June in 1953. The protests began by action from the construction workers against work quotas during the Sovietization process in East Germany. In terms of economic development, East Berlin was lagging behind West Berlin, but it should be stated that West Berlin had two advantages. First, it enjoyed the benefits of the Marshall Plan. East Germany also had the disadvantage of having exacted war reparations upon it by the Soviet Union in repayment for all the damages of the Second World War. The leader of the GDR at the time, Walter Ulbricht, was very much a product of the Soviet school. A year earlier, in 1952, Stalin had attempted to unify Germany, but that plan had been rejected by the West, and this really gave the green light for Ulbricht to implement many Soviet-style economic plans. Many German factories were converted from producing consumer goods to heavy industrial goods. And with the brain drain continuing to the West, many talented and skilled people were leaving East Germany, and coupled with increasing food prices, this led to much unrest. You can see in the picture a Soviet T-34 tank, and these tanks were used to brutally repress any riots and protests. The memorial to the events of 1953 was designed by Wolfgang Ruppel and was placed in front of the Federal Ministry of Finance in June 2000. The memorial shows a picture of strikers marching to the building known as the House of Ministries shortly before the demonstration was broken up, with terrible loss of life and horrendous violence. We've arrived at the Brandenburg Gates. It's about 6 to 6:30 in the evening. It's been a long day. We've already walked about 8 to 10 miles around Berlin. There's a great buzz and atmosphere around the gates, and I think for two reasons. One, there's a lot of tourists, there's a lot of visitors here. It's a place of great interest. And secondly, it's about 24 hours since Eliud Kipchoge of Kenya broke the world record for the men's marathon. And we're bumping into lots of people who did the Berlin Marathon. There's lots of people with their medals around their neck, and also with the finishers' t-shirts. We've got our first viewing of the famous Berlin television tower, the Fürstenturm Berlin. Built as a symbol of communist and East German power in the 1960s, very much a symbol of modern Berlin. We've just passed the British Embassy, and to our left and right we can see the US and French embassies. This is very much the modern Berlin, and something I would not have seen in 1982 when I last visited here. I would be very much in no man's land. The Brandenburg Gates were very much at the divide between East and West Berlin. You could see them, but you could never get close. The Brandenburg Gates are an 18th century neoclassical monument built on the orders of the Prussian King Frederick William II after restoring the Orange's power by suppressing the Dutch popular unrest. After the defeat of Prussia in the 1806 Battle of Jena-Auerstedt, Napoleon was the first to use the Brandenburg Gates for a triumphal procession and took its quadriga back to Paris. This humiliating defeat was reversed in 1814 with Prussian occupation of Paris under Ernst von Bülow. The quadriga was restored to Berlin. The gates were redesigned as a Prussian triumphal arch, and the goddess Victoria was equipped with a Prussian eagle and iron cross on her lance with a wreath of oak leaves. We're now coming up to the famous Reichstag building, which is the lower house of the German Parliament. The new Reichstag was redesigned by Sir Norman Foster. The building we see before us was opened in 1894 and housed the Bundestag until 1933, when it was set on fire by the Nazis. After the Second World War, when the building had been much damaged by the Soviet occupation, there was really no real political purpose for the building, because the West German government was housed in the Bundeshaus in Bonn, and the East German government met at the Palace der Republik in East Berlin. Restoration only really took place after German reunification in October 1990, and the whole place is completed to how I remember it in 1982. Then it wasn't the seat of any German government. Now it is the seat of the German government since reunification. We've come to the end of our first day in Berlin. It's been truly memorable, wonderful city with wonderful experiences today. But it's been very tiring, and now rewarded myself with a couple of litres of wonderful German Berlin beer. I've gone for a darker beer of Dunkel, and I've followed that by a litre of blonde. So that's it for today. There's going to be a few more videos from our trip to Berlin. I hope you've enjoyed it.